muka sa a gaba barista Sadiq alkhairi ne. Wakilcin son harafu fore a tarayya kai zaka tafi. Mun gamsu da kai mun yarda da kai ba za mu bi jirgin yawo ba.
Ni farar aniya muka sa a gaba barista Sadiq alkhairi ne. Wakilcin son harafu fore a tarayya kai zaka tafi. Mun gamsu da kai mun yarda da kai ba za mu bi jirgin yawo.
Honorable Sadiq, please.
I represent the people of Song and Fufore, and I'm from Adamawa State. Mr. Speaker, I like the mannerism of the last speaker. He makes points with gesticulations that drives his points home. But on a very serious note, Mr. Speaker, I want to lend my voice to the amendment proposed by two legal giants on this floor, Mr. Abonta and my friend, Mr. Pojok. Mr. Speaker, all the 21 sections that are marked here by the proposals of this amendment, 4 amendments are apt. And Mr. Speaker, I will lend my voice for this House to agree Mr. Speaker, that this bill be read for the second time. There is a particular section, Mr. Speaker, that caught my attention, which I want us to look at very critically, and that is Section 243 of the Principal Act, which is also sought to be amended. Mr. Speaker, this particular section says, and I read with your kind permission, that any person dissatisfied with a decision of the tribunal constituted under this act may appeal against such decision on points of law to the Court of Appeal upon giving grounds in writing to the Secretary of the Tribunal within 30 days after the date on which the decision was given. Mr. Speaker, it appears to me that appeal from decisions of the tribunal from this section shall only be taken upon point of law only, not points of facts. And the reason I think is simple. The IST, Investment and Securities Tribunal, have 10 judges, 6 of which must be lawyers, and the chairman, who is from the 10, must also be a lawyer. The reason why the original act contains this section is that there are specialized persons, because the issue of securities and investment is a specialized area. There are people who are versed in the area. Therefore, lawyers alone cannot meet the requirement of this act if appeals from the decision of the tribunal will only go straight to the Court of Appeal, instead of taking it to the assessors, who may be stockbrokers and other investment experts. So I think to say that you can remove these points of law and make the appeal to go to the Court of Appeal on all points of law and fact, you will be missing a very, very good contribution from the experts that are trained in this field over and over and over again. And the second contribution I want to make, there are a lot of sections that are sought to be amended here, which asks that it is the minister, i.e. the Minister of Commerce, that may make regulations for the running of this tribunal. And I think this smacks of relics of military dictatorship. There is no reason why a tribunal constituted under the 1999 Constitution in the democracy that we are in today, that a minister will be given the power to make laws and regulations for that tribunal. I like the way the amendment came, that it is the NJC, i.e. the National Judicial Commission, that will make regulations for the tribunal. I know, Mr. Speaker, there will be time for the third reading of this bill and to go to a committee, and a lot of contributions will be made, because this particular act is an act that provides for ways of doing business in Nigeria that foreigners could also access we should make it easy for investors from outside the shores of this country to come here and invest, and without fear of any court where the decision will be made by a minister that will mar the rules of transparency as obtained in international business cycles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity.
So I put the question. The question is that this bill be now read the second time. Those in favor of the motion say aye. Those against it say nay. The ayes have it. Honorable Sadiq, please.
Mr. Speaker, I would like first of all to ask this House to recall that it is we that approved the MTEF, i.e. the medium-term expenditure framework. It is based on that framework, Mr. Speaker, that this budget was prepared and anchored, which to me is a clear indication that the budget is that of transition towards change. It is a budget of transition for 3 years, 2016, 2018, because this is a novel line of budgeting, at least as far as this country is concerned. Mr. Speaker, this budget was prepared when we have a headache, Mr. Speaker. There is no doubt that this budget came at a trying and challenging period for us as a country because, Mr. Speaker, investors had lost 1.03 billion naira in the Nigerian Stock Exchange in just 2 months, leading to the preparation of this budget. Inflation is at its highest rate. Crude oil is sold for $27 per barrel today, and Iran, Mr. Speaker, has pumped in, or will pump in, 500 million barrels of oil to further drag the market down. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, the naira sold for 199 naira to a dollar at the official rate, and it sold for up to 299 naira at the parallel market. Leading to the preparation of this budget, Mr. Speaker, everybody knew that Nigeria was shortchanged in the crude oil swap. And just last week, Mr. Speaker, pipelines were vandalized at Boni and Escravos, which of course cut oil supplies, crude supplies to Warri and Kaduna refineries. Mr. Speaker, by this, everybody must have noticed in this country that electricity supply has really gone down. This is pure sabotage. This is how, in the circumstance where this budget was prepared. But, Mr. Speaker, these are the headaches, but there are also hopes. Mr. Speaker, I have hope because less than 7 months to the coming of this regime, Mr. Speaker, when hope was lost, at least as far as the northeastern part of this country is concerned. But today, those local governments in Borno and Yobe and Adamawa have been recovered. So one can comfortably say today, Mr. Speaker, that this country has a roadmap. It has a direction under a leader that is capable of leading. Mr. Speaker, I have hope that the TSA is in place. Leakages are being blocked and savings are being made for the future. This is a hope for a better day. Mr. Speaker, there is the Stamp Duties Act. This is a law that was made in 1939, but it was only amended in 2004. By this amendment, Mr. Speaker, the CBN has already issued a circular to make it work in a bid to show up non-oil revenue for this budget and plug shortfalls, Mr. Speaker. Financial transactions across commercial banks will, as from today, charge 50 naira or what is called, or what I can call $0.2513 on every 1,000 naira deposited by any customer. So money is still coming to this administration, And I wish I was still in the banking sector, and I will see how much Dangote Group would have been charged if 50 naira would be charged for every 1,000 naira that will be deposited into their own accounts. Mr. Speaker, there is also hope that stolen funds, as we all know, are being recovered, and I'm more hopeful than I have ever been today, Mr. Speaker, that I watch our own Mr. Geoffrey Onyema, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, when he told this nation on Tuesday that Switzerland has returned $100 million to this country. That is hope. Mr. Speaker, a budget that has a social content that would, of up to 500 billion naira in respect of school feeding program, and then conditional cash transfer for the most vulnerable, and the post-NYSC. This, to me, is also hope. Mr. Speaker, I will conclude by saying that I know so many of us here will say that this budget is anchored on $38 per barrel, and it is not feasible for us to achieve that. But, Mr. Speaker, resources are never sufficient, and they will never be sufficient. Budgets are prepared based on assumptions and projections. And that is why Section 80, subsection 4, A and B of the 1999 Constitution is very clear. And it says that where the President, even after we have passed this budget, finds out that there is insufficiency of funds in any head of account or in the Federation, or certain heads of account have not been allocated any amount of money, he will come back here to us, Mr. Speaker, so that we can pass a supplementary budget for him. So, Mr. Speaker, things are never equal, because the economists that propounded the theory of budget put it based on things being equal, and things will never be equal. But the X on which, the hard X that we suffered, on which this budget is anchored, is now watered down by the plethora of the hopes that I have listed to this House. With this, Mr. Speaker, I call on you, my colleagues, to please, without hesitation, agree that this budget and this budget proposal be read for a second time for us to dissolve into a committee and make sure that we pass it in record time, because Nigerians are waiting. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Sadiq, please.
Thank you so very much for recognizing me to speak.
Silence, please.
A very important amendment to the Robbery and Firearms Act that was brought by Honorable Osai. My name is Sadiq Ibrahim. I represent Fufore Song, Federal Constituency from the land of beauty, Adamawa. Mr. Speaker, the simple issue to discuss here regarding this bill is just the rules of interpretation of law. Simple. Two cardinal principles of interpretation are the golden rule and the mischief rule, Mr. Speaker. If you look at this law, the framers of this act, what they had in mind when making this law was the mischief that this law set to cure. And if you tell me that the principal act says that an offense that is for imprisonment of not less than 21 years, you want us to fix it for 21 years definite, you have missed the rule of interpretation of rules of interpretation of the mischief that this law set to cure. Now, every crime, Mr. Speaker, it has its degree and it also has its category. Therefore, if there is robbery which is accompanied with violence, the judge will not have the leeway whether to sentence the accused for 21 years or more.
Order,
or less.
please.
That gives the
Silence,
judge
please.
the latitude to look at, because law is a matter of evidence. It is the evidence that is provided before the judge that will determine the punishment as given within the ambit of the law given by the legislature. Absolutely. But then, Mr. Speaker, if you say that the punishment for crime of armed robbery is 21 years definite, somebody could be convicted of armed robbery with a lesser degree of the offense. Why give him 21 years? You are punishing more. Well, if the armed robbery is accompanied with violence and a life is lost, if you said the punishment is 21 years, you are punishing him less for a grievous offense. So there is no need to fix this offense. I mean the punishment for the offense. If my argument goes, Mr. Speaker, it also goes for all the prayers of Honorable Osai, except for the fact that I will agree with him on point of law that capital punishment all over the world is no longer in vogue. If we can abolish capital punishment, I am for it. So, and then the third one is also the same, Mr. Speaker. If you said this is a definite offense for 20 years, you are still not giving the judge the leeway to give lesser punishment or to give higher punishment. So for me, this amendment, Mr. Speaker, should not be supported by this House, because giving a judge a definite punishment, you don't give him the leeway to look at the evidences brought before him to be able to categorize and punish people for the gravity and the grievances of the offense they committed. I think is terribly wrong for any legislation to do. Thank you very much.
Barista Sadiq Ibrahim
Honorable Sadiq, please.
Mr. Speaker, I stood up here to lend my voice to this motion as ably moved by Honorable Madaki. Mr. Speaker, Kano is one city that I'm emotionally attached to. And Mr. Speaker, for all practical purposes, this is a city that is the center of commerce for northern Nigeria. As it is today, Mr. Speaker, 3 airlines, Sudan, Ethiopian, and Turkish, goes to Kano International Airport. At the same time, this same Emirates goes to Kano, but cargo only. The flow of traffic in the Aminu Kano International Airport supports this motion. Mr. Speaker, in just one moment, I want to say just one thing, that we need to be cautious in the way we open up our airports to international airlines. Abuja, Lagos, Kano, and Enugu, Port Harcourt. By the time we allow all manner of aircrafts into these airports, by the time we have one international airline from Nigeria or 2, or eventually, as the president has alluded, for Nigeria to have its own national carrier, by the time it comes into Nigeria, it will be very difficult for us to compete from these airports where we allow international aircrafts to be flying into. That is not to say that I'm going to oppose this motion. I'm going to, as I said, support it. That we should allow that agreement entered into between Nigeria and the Emirates to fly into Kano, because the number of passengers and the business attendant to the bringing in of that aircraft to Kano will improve. However, finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to correct one historical impression created by this motion, that Aminu Kano International Airport is the first airport in Nigeria in 1925. That is far from the truth. Students of history knows that the first airport in Nigeria is Yola International Airport. That is where, Mr. Speaker, with all sense of responsibility, this is where in 1918, when that part of the country was part of the German territory, an aircraft landed from Germany in defense of the German territory that we were in that part of the country and Cameroon. Thank you very much, my honorable colleagues, Mr. Speaker. I hope others will support this motion. Thank you, sir.
Tubali na toka bai karo koko wai sake da shi zai fado da tamara ake tafiyar fama a yau nasara kuma
Honorable Sadiq, please.
My name is Sadiq Ibrahim. I represent the people of Fufore and Song Federal Constituency from the State of Beauty, Adamawa State. Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid I am not in support of reading this bill for the second time. And I have my reasons. I'm going to give a general reason, Mr. Speaker, and then I'll give a specific reason for not lending my voice to this bill. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, the need for us to know the number of people in this country cannot be overemphasized. Of course, for planning, and even if just for the sake of knowing how many we are. But Mr. Speaker, a constitution should not, Mr. Speaker, be made cumbersome, and it should not be made tedious to read. The way we are going, Mr. Speaker, if care is not taken, we may end up amending this constitution 100 times that it will become so bulky that it will be difficult for us to teach it in the universities, and it will be difficult for us, for our lawyers, to be conversant with it and quote it in the courts of law with precision. Mr. Speaker, let us maintain the sanctity of this sacred document. It is supposed to be the framework that is just a bond, and then the flesh is supposed to be in the laws that establishes, in the law that establishes the commissions and agencies of government. Mr. Speaker, to say that you can put a time frame within which a census must be conducted within 10 years or below, it means that you are putting it in the Constitution, which is a very serious document, breach of which will attract serious penalty. And penalty for breach of Constitution, as we all know, is impeachment. What happens, for instance, Mr. Speaker, if you put this as a provision of the Constitution, that census must be held within 10 years or below, and because of economic reasons, the president or the commission is unable to conduct the Constitution, which means the president has violated the provision of the Constitution. To me, Mr. Speaker, our commissions and agencies are established by law. Instead of attempting to put this issue in the Constitution, it is better for us to amend the National Population Act so that our own National Population Commission can decide on when to conduct population census. Mr. Speaker, I'm even supported by the mover of this motion himself. If you look at paragraph 2 of his brief of argument, Mr. Speaker, he said, and I quote, "The present constitutional provision gives room for the NPC to conduct population census at its own convenience or any period solely determined by it. This bill, therefore, seeks to cure the constitutional defect